Thank you so much for coming out. I see like smiles. This is so awesome. It's like everybody's like this, and I'm like, okay. This is such an amazing day for a lot of reasons, and I've been planning this for like months now. And then I just wanted to just take a little time out for just to recognize the lives that were lost in Orlando. I asked this is back in December, if he would sing that song just to open it up, because I just wanted to say how grateful I was that I was here and that I would even have the chance to be here. And I asked just this morning, because it's only 2 days old, I asked if he could just do something also just to honor the lives lost there. Would you guys mind if he just sings just something really quick? It's a gospel song, but it's how I communicate and how a lot of people communicate just the sorrow and grief that we're all going through right now. Okay, thank you.
Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for my heavenly home, when Jesus is my portion? A constant friend is He, for His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. Oh, His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me.
Thank you so much. I love that song because there's so much beauty. Like, I sing because I'm happy. It's like in your moments of just, doesn't even make sense to be happy. And it's just, I sing because I'm happy. And I love those beautiful moments and just such pain, salvaging those things. So thank you. Oh.
All right, shall we?
Sorry.
Let's move from there into grace.
Oh.
So what I was hoping we would do to further put off the conversation is to have you read a little bit, because today is publication date. So I'm sure the A students in the crowd have read the book already, but as a lifelong non-A student, although I have read the book, but I figure there are many more of you who haven't read the book. So I figured we'd start with just a little taste, just to get a sense of the language and the flow of the story, and then we'll talk for a while, and then we'll have you guys come in and have some questions. So.
Okay, so this is the opening. I am dead. I died a nigga a long time ago. Before you were born. Before your mother was born. Before your grandmother. I was 17. Still am, I reckon. And everyone that was there that night is dead now too, so it don't matter that I was a nigga or a slave. What matters is that I had a daughter who had daughters and they had theirs. Family, I could have saved a whole lot of trouble by telling them the things that I know. But there's some stories that mothers never tell their daughters. secret stories. Stories that would prove a mother was once young, done things with men she could never tell, in ways she could never tell, in places she could never. Private stories where love, any semblance of love, would lead a person like me to the place I was that night in 1848 when I died. For 2 days and 2 nights we've been running, me and the child inside me. Pain is trying to get me to stop, make me push away the pain, but I won't push. My pretty yellow dress is stained red and brown now, not by the blood of the man I killed like they think. It's mine. The dark of night's been hiding my running for a while, muffling the sounds of my chest gushing in and out from my own hard breaths. Every few steps, the blue light of the moon sneaks past the treetops and strokes my face, urging me on. The only mercy I get in these hot Alabama woods. The devil's coming, and I have to keep moving. For this baby, for me. But the pain's burning so bad now that I can't hardly do nothing but fall against this old tree. Hands slip sliding down its bark, stinging. Barking from the hunting dogs is shooting across the air, bumping around inside me. I have to move faster, run like sister once told me to. I beg my belly, hold on to me, it ain't time. But this baby's got a plan. Its head's at my opening spot, burning hot, ripping my hips wide apart, carving a way out. I hold in my screams and bow over hard in the dirt, knees first. A man's voice shouts, "This way, she's up this way." I want to live, want this baby to live, but she's betraying me. Every muscle in my body slamming shut, so I push. She's tearing through me, I push. I don't want to, but I push. Screaming mute deep inside myself, pushing so hard, but hollering so low that they can't hear me. A wave of warm water pours out of me, carrying my joy and deep sorrow. Before God and this oak tree, she come, and she don't cry. I guess she want us to live too. I move her into the triangle of moonlight where my arm is set aglow, and she see me, and I see in her the good part of love. The weight of them push me over, these dogs clawing and biting at my back, but the pain ain't gonna make me give her up to them. I gotta protect her. Get up, keep running. I feel my legs, so I bend them. Feel them firm on the ground, so I push up. I hold her close with one arm and pull up with the other. I can make it. I tell myself again how to run, counting my steps. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. A spark of light, a loud pop. Nothing. My last thought is to not fall on my baby. Thank you.
I'm glad you started with that because I don't want to. I don't want to spoil anything, but I wanted to ask you about writing from the point of view of a ghost or of a dead narrator. Right? I mean, this is not a metaphor. There's metaphors in it, but it's not a metaphor in terms of the actual narrative. This particular narrator is. It dies at the beginning of the novel and then goes on and narrates a large chunk of it. So I wanted to talk about that as a kind of strategy and how that developed and how was it more difficult than if she had been alive throughout the course of the action.
Yeah, I wanted her to be able to see things and go places that she wouldn't normally go because she was a runaway slave. So in life she was limited by who she was born into the world as. And I wanted, young, 17, a runaway slave, and I wanted, and often, you don't leave, like even now, people don't leave their neighborhoods. So there she was confined. She was, because of her situation, she was even more confined than other slaves until she left. So I wanted her to be able to explore the world in different ways that I hadn't seen in other books. For instance, most narratives that had slaves as main characters, they were often single. There was often the single-mindedness that I saw, freedom north, but I wanted her to be more than that in different ways, intellectually and everything. You know, I wanted her to be like I am. You know, we are all born with the capacity to love, to have friendships, to have, you know, to want things, to dream. You know, every child is born that way. And often when I would read stories about slaves, it was like almost looking at animals in a zoo. You know, you're coming to see them and then there they are working, and, you know, they didn't really want anything other than, you know, the occasional, let's go north, let's get away. But I wanted her because I knew that she would, like people have done for thousands of years. She wanted things.
Yeah.
She falls in love. And then as a ghost, she could do even more.
How much, in terms of creating the landscape, because she's of her moment, but she's also very contemporary and in a sense like recognizable, exactly as you're saying, sort of in terms of her desires, her aspirations. How much research went into the creation of these characters and of this story? And, you know, especially because it is a novel, what was the kind of balance between, say, research and creativity or information and intuition in terms of your crafting the story?
Well, the first thing I wanted to do was to write the story and then find things out. And people who have heard me talk about this story before know that I got this story. I was walking down the hallway with my son. I thought he was going to die, and I had this vision, dream, whatever you want to call it, daydream, and it was nighttime. I can remember it like vividly. I could see it right now, even in my mind. And I was walking with him, and it was nighttime, even though I knew I was in my hallway. And there was the moon, and we were in the woods, and I knew it was Alabama. And I saw this woman running, this girl, about 17, and she had on a yellow dress that had blood, and she was pregnant. And I could hear her voice. I knew, it was like I knew everything about her, and then she died. So the opening that I read is actually what I saw that day, 8 years ago. So it wasn't, I gave my son to my husband who's here. I was like, just hold him. I need to write this down, what I saw, you know, and then the rest of the novel didn't come.
Spoken like a true writer.
Right.
In the delivery room with a pen
just
and
take
a
the
notebook.
baby. No, but I heard her and I knew her, but it was all the voices of my grandmother. You know, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and when she would talk, or, you know, sometimes they go back into these memories. So sometimes she would be eating at the table, and then she would start feeding these imaginary dogs like chicken bones, and she'd be talking to them, and I'm like, there are no dogs there, and she'd be and I could hear her, and she would revert to, it was a different sound. She sounded different. She was from Alabama. She came the last few years of her life here to LA, but I heard that. And so the story to me, it was her voice mixed with this woman's voice that I saw. And as far as research, I couldn't read a lot of the stuff that I was reading. Like, it was too difficult to read, so I put it in a way that I could understand it, and I thought the readers would appreciate it more.
Right. Well, you're crafting that emotional journey as well as, I mean, it's a historical journey because it's got the historical backdrop, but it's an emotional journey. It's a mother-daughter story that expands outward. There are all of these kind of interesting overlapping relationships. What about how, in terms of creating the structure of it, I want to go back. So let's start with 8 years.
Okay.
So, and originally, at least as I recall, there was a screenplay. You were going to write it as a screenplay, and then it became a novel, and it went through. It was a PhD. It was an MFA thesis. All of these kinds of different iterations. So, can you take us a little bit through the process of how it got created and how it moved from one form to the next?
So I had written screenplays like for MTV that were on. I was like, these little shorts and things. So I had no idea how to write a novel when that happened to me, when I was walking down the hallway with my son.
Right.
So I had written it out, and just that opening. And then I thought, when I wrote the screenplay and then it started winning awards, I just had the story. I knew how it was going to go, you know. But I was sitting in a meeting, and they were talking about it. You know, because things that you don't think about in a screenplay, like sound, you know, you have a director that edits it, you have sound, you have lighting, all these things that as a novelist you have to add. You know, there's nobody adding sound effects for you, or there's no actors, you know, just giving that look or whatever it is. Right. You know, there's none of that. And you actually have to do that. You have to do your own. Yeah. And I didn't realize, so I was like, I'll just change it from screenplay to novel. Now it's done. I was like, it was terrible. It was terrible. You know, it was terrible. It was just like all dialogue, and it was just terrible. But then I said, I need to get serious about if I want to tell my story, because I wasn't happy in the option meeting. In that meeting, I said, I have to finish this. I think I've been given this story from wherever stories come from for every writer. You know, you get a story and you just know you have to finish it. Even if it's your own life story, you have to tell this thing, however it's going to be. So I knew I had to tell the story, and it was my journey. It was my gift that I had to take across the finish line. So that's when I started. So I started at UCLA and extension.
Right.
And one of my teachers said, you know, you should apply for this Penn Fellowship. You have the kind of writing that we think. So then that was my first serious literary thing, Penn Emerging Voices Fellowship.
Right, that's where we met.
Yeah, that's the first time we met. So, and then but I didn't know anything about writing at that. I was a lawyer. I was doing healthcare law and, you know, Affordable Health Care Act. I was helping to craft that with politicians. I was like doing all that. I didn't realize that it was actually going to affect my life at that time, because I didn't know I had preeclampsia when I was pregnant with my daughter, and that high blood pressure made it so that I couldn't qualify for healthcare. I didn't know that because I always had it. I always had an employer. And then when I left to pursue this dream, like, I'm going to write this novel, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't get insurance anywhere.
Right.
I mean, not like it's going to be $1,000 a month. I couldn't get insurance. Nobody, because I had pre-existing condition. And then I got really sick. And then they told me I was going to die. And then I got the thing in Prague, and I was like, you know what? I'll just get insurance. They can fly my body back. I was like, I'm going to do this thing. I got this story, and I think it's important. And I've already quit my job, so it's too late anyway. I'm closer to this side than this side, so I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened. And I've written a lot of short stories since then, you know.
Let's take it through. So you wrote it. So you went into the Emerging Voices program. Then from there you went into the MFA. You worked on the novel as your thesis. I know there's a lot of students in the room. I'm interested in this idea of that progression and sort of seeing the book through. I mean, it's a difference it's a different project, or a different iteration from the thesis to the finished book. You know, you finish the thesis, you think you're done, but actually you're just starting, right?
Yeah, you're just starting. So when I went from the Emerging Voices Fellowship, I just thought the natural step for me was MFA, because I thought I need to get a job because I need health care so I could teach if I have an MFA. And I was like, 4 years will pass anyway, or 3 years, or whatever it is will pass anyway. I could be doing that, and I can get student loans that I won't be able to pay back. But you know, I just wanted to stay faithful to it, you know, as best that I could. And when I finished my thesis, it wasn't finished. I thought it was going to be finished. You know, a lot of people go into an MFA program thinking they're going to come out with this finished product that's going to sell, and it does not happen like that. It's not ready. You're still not developed as a writer. So I had to keep writing, keep practicing. So it's completely different from that thesis, the first 150 pages, to the end that it is now, which is 403 pages. And then you work with your agent. You know, I got an agent because of my relationships in my MFA program. And then I found Dan, who took my novel, which was 500 and something pages. He's amazing. And, you know, and he cut it down, but it had been rejected. You know, I told the MFA students that I talked to, I felt really bad because my agent, who sold everything to, like, you know, Simon and Schuster, you know, like straight out the box, 1-2 days, she's like, this isn't selling. And then she would say, talk to the editors because they want to talk to you about it. Right. They want you to change it, but, you know, so I would talk to them and I would listen, and they didn't have the vision for they wanted to change it in ways that I thought would hurt the book. Like historical facts, like the Emancipation Proclamation, they wanted to revolve around, you know, that, which wasn't true. Like, they thought it would be a happy day for slaves. Like, why aren't your slaves happy? It's the Emancipation. And I'm like...
Because they don't live in the U.S.
I know, right? So things like that, you know, and for me it was about the relationship between the women, the mother and daughter, the women. And when I talked to Dan, at that time I had one other offer on it. I was talking to Dan, and he saw what I saw. He said, this is how I see it, as a mother-daughter story, and I see it as a story of women. And then that became that. And then I loved him, and I've loved him ever since. That's Dan. He's a brilliant editor.
If we keep applauding, he'll blush.
I know, he's already blushing.
So let's talk about I think one of the interesting things is those kind of parallels and this idea, in a way, of a world of women. There are certainly male characters in the book, and some are even sympathetic, but it is really... But it is really a world of women in many ways. Both the mother and the daughter as kind of as runaways, or where they land. They land with a powerful woman who sort of defines their experience, and they and I'm interested in that as a kind of both an intention going in, or just how it evolved in the story. In some ways, it feels like they're living kind of almost parallel existences over the course of the 15 or 20 years difference between, because you do go back and sort of trace the mother's story. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that sense of that world of women and the parallels between the two main narrative threads.
It was important for me to tell stories of women that haven't been, really in history, women didn't really develop the rights that we have now. You're talking late 60s, 70s, even today, even today, we're still struggling for equal pay and things like that, and who we are. We're still finding those things. So it wasn't hard, but I know that we existed. Just like I knew that there were slaves who existed that wanted things. So I intentionally wanted to have women who wanted things, who ran things, and who had to survive. Not just black women. That's why I have a Latina character. I have,
you
have
a
main
Southern Jewish character.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Because I was in South Carolina. For an award, and it had the largest population of Jewish people outside of Europe. Lived in South Carolina. Politician, and that was fascinating to me. So what would happen if these women didn't have men? Because your survival depended on you being married or with your family. So I wanted them to be separated somehow, to find their way. And I know that there were women that existed like that, and I know that there were men who didn't care.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely, and they create their own sort of their own extended families in a way. These women, in the book, in life as well, but in the book, they do that. Also feels really kind of both, of its moment, but also quite contemporary in terms of those interactions and those dynamics. How about there is. It's not a political novel exactly, although it is a political novel. All art is political in many ways. I'm curious about your thoughts about that quality of engagement. Story, right? The story comes to you, or the character comes to you in a kind of a vision or something, but there are all of these bigger applications of the story. And so I wonder if you can talk a bit about that, whether in terms of the creation of the story, or even if, your own sense of the writer's responsibility in terms of those materials.
A lot of my work as a lawyer, when you're working with cases, is you're comparing something that happened to someone else to see if it's exactly like this other case. So you're comparing to say, no, if you want them to win, my case is different than this guy's case because he didn't do XYZ. Like, he didn't go and buy ammo. He just had the gun with him. So it's different. So it's not, that's the difference between like second-degree murder and first-degree murder, your intention. So little things that you try to show the difference. The thing about American history, or about people's history in general, is we're still doing the same exact things as we've always done, packaged differently. So even what happened in Orlando, even the issues of immigration, we've been dealing with these things,
right.
The same. There's nothing new. It's just new faces.
Yeah.
And, and there's the division that that people create, whether it's religion, sexual orientation, all these things that we create to keep us divided, when I wanted to show the humanity, that we are human beings, we're going through the same thing, and we have to step outside the box to find the solutions. And I wanted them to do that, and I wanted to compare and contrast. It was interesting to me that the Civil War was started by a Frenchman. And when you see people talk about the Civil War and they fly the Confederate flag and all that, they're talking, Americans, and the guy that actually ordered the cannons in Fort Sumter he didn't even speak English till he was 12 years old.
Right, he was Louisiana.
He was in Louisiana on this small little and then we're still arguing about what it means to be an American. What if you don't speak the language? What if it's Spanish? What if all those things, we're doing.
You got Newt Gingrich today calling for a revival in some sense of the House Un-American Activities Committee.
What are you talking? Yeah, so it's baffling. What does it mean to be American? So it's like, what it means to be American is to keep the divisiveness that keeps us. So my goal was to show how similar we are and how America is who we are and how we define it right now. Mm-hmm. It's not these ideas or these mystic, I don't know, however we've created history to fit ourselves, which is not how history actually went down, because they would hate that Frenchman if they knew all the Confederate, going down, they would. I don't think they would really appreciate that about their history, that it was an immigrant that started your favorite war, right? Yeah. It's like okay, let's, but I, and part of what I want to do is reclaim our narrative, to write a new narrative, to tell the narrative more accurately.
Right. Well, that sounds, because I think you're right. On the one hand, you're absolutely right about kind of that aspect of the history, but this is a book that speaks in a way to American idealism, or the ideal of that, again, people from a bunch of different backgrounds, bunch of different experiences coming together and kind of, in many ways, not always, but helping each other or kind of living together. So, how do those two things fit together for you?
Yeah, I wanted things that bother me, I put in, as a writer, it's in your mind, it's there. And I want it to be, and I always talk about doing this, it's an opportunity to put a virus in the system. You think we're that different, here you go, here's a little virus, just to get people to think differently about who we are. Like, I was reading a post today of a friend who's here who was talking about the word gun control. It's a word the NRA, developed instead of gun safety or something like that. So the words that we choose and things like, no matter where we are, it keeps us from just having real conversations. Like, there are people dying. We can talk about this because we're all on the same team. Mm-hmm. We don't have to create all this language that divides us or this history that we make up. We're actually all the same. We have the same commonality, and we're human beings above all. So
yeah, no, I completely agree. I want to talk to you about language, because language, obviously, all books are made of language, but the narrative voice is really pronounced in this book. So in terms of your thinking about language and character, or language and words, sort of like what you were just saying, the choice of words, the choice of expression, the way the character asserts herself in many ways by not just what she says, but how she says it. How did that voice evolve?
I always found that my family being from the South, especially, like, people would treat the way that they would talk as if they were unintelligent. Mm-hmm. And we treat, depending on what the accent is, we'll treat them differently. So I wanted her to be able to express herself in a way, she didn't have the words, which she didn't, and to be able to, but it made it by giving her the ability to describe things with fewer words. So it challenged me as a writer, because I couldn't just summarize it in one word. Mm-hmm. Like, she had to walk through, what that felt like, what that meant. And it actually makes the readers get closer to her, how she's thinking, how her thought process, and also to her, because you're not judging her. She's not intelligent. She knows what's going on.
Oh, clearly.
And I wanted it to be that. And just like I think that the slaves knew and had opinions and, and all that.
Well, and also, as you were saying, she's 17. She's an old 17 in the sense of what she's lived through, but she's 17, but she's still immensely wise. Not only does she know what she's been through, but she's pretty good at figuring out what the score is.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you put it all together, because you're still practicing. You practice and you teach, and you're writing. You've got this book out. You're still doing other writing. You have a family. What's a day look like?
Usually, if I'm teaching, I'm usually teaching a couple classes during the day. I'm writing whenever I can. So, waiting in line to pick up my children, or, on my phone. So I use the notes, and I'm just writing. But and then I practice in the morning. So I'm usually out of court by 10 a.m. And I have cases months before. So I'm preparing. And then it's usually short. So I'm only in there for 10 minutes, because most of the decisions that I make, or the work that's done, is before you actually step into the courtroom, except for sex-related crimes where you actually have to still argue. And
how, you were alluding a little bit before in terms of the discussion of ACA, of sort of the relationship, or how writing and the law talk to each other a little bit, but how do those two fields? Is it that you really are pulling out of writing when you're working on the legal side, and vice versa, so they each kind of are a relief from the other, or are they kind of communicating and crossing currents?
I think they communicate a lot, because I have the struggles that I have as an attorney, especially on the criminal side. Like, a lot of it is about forgiveness, because I do post-conviction work, so I erase records or work toward pardons and things like that. So I'm retelling stories, like retelling a history, or I'm saying this person is sorry for doing this thing. They take responsibility for it and they're sorry. So a lot of what I have in Grace is about redemption. It is about forgiveness. And when do we forgive? And what is there anything that's not forgivable? So those are things that are in there. I think murder is not, there's a
couple of justifiable homicides in the book.
Yeah, but can you get justice for murder? Because you can't. Justice would be getting that person back.
Right.
So justice, right, is getting the thing that you lost, and you can never get that thing back. So that bothers me. Mm-hmm. So things like that, like So is it killing somebody? Is that how you get your justice?
Right. I mean, one of the key scenes in the middle of the book involves that question when, that question of the necessity of forgiveness rather than vengeance, mm-hmm. which, coming as it does, is, I mean, it's an eye-opening turn. It completely makes sense, although you don't see it coming. It's a surprise when it comes. Mm-hmm. So it's that's that idea in sort of three-dimensional narrative action. Mm-hmm. Did you know that was going to happen all the way through when you were writing?
No. I didn't know anything that happened in that book was going to happen until I got to that point, and then it made sense. Like, the same way all the writers in here, you write, of course that makes sense. Or somebody says something, you're like, Right. Or Dan will be like, cut this thing, and then it's like, that makes sense. Of course that happens.
Right. I really need those 50 pages. I guess I don't need those 50.
I don't need them. I don't need it. It doesn't make sense. Why is that even here? Yeah.
So what are you working on now? Do you want to say? Are you going to jump into another? Are you jumping into another novel? You said you were writing stories and shorter stuff. Are you? What's the plan?
I have 2 novels that I'm like playing with. I don't know which one is going to just grab me, but one is about a caregiver. So I've kind of moved along in that one about a woman who cares for people who are dying.
And I'm curious about the stories. Not that you have to tell us anything about them, but I'm curious about the balance, because I know I've read your essays as well. Balance between long and short form as a writer. Not even necessarily which you prefer, but what the short gives you that the long doesn't, and vice versa.
I think for me right now, because I don't write many short stories, I just write until I'm finished. There's no.
That's good.
I write till it's done. Right. Like with the novel, I was just writing it, and okay, it's done. It's done. Yeah.
All right. Should we turn it over to some audience questions?
Yeah.
All right. Whose hand's going up first?
Hey, David.
That's a sort of odd question. When you were reading, it struck me that you had this experience where you somehow received this voice. And I'm wondering whether, I've had experiences where I've written stuff that I had no real idea about, and it transpired that was stuff that had happened in my family that I had no way of knowing. I was wondering, were you channeling something you think which was sort of cultural or familial, and have you learned? Do you know a lot about your family history, and are there things that you drew upon from that, or is that stuff coming through your DNA, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I read something about how pain comes through your DNA. So maybe that. But I often wonder. Somebody asked me before I started writing this book, why did your family never leave from the small town? Because they were enslaved in the same town that they end up living in. So East Tallahassee, Alabama, which is the setting of this, that's where they were actually, long generations of slavery was in that town. And they never left after the Civil War, after the Emancipation. And I never knew why they left. So we would go there in the summers and spend time. I don't know why my mom and dad were the first ones to leave that town after the end of slavery, when they all migrated to the West. So that was always a question that I had, like, what happened there? Why didn't you go? Why would you stay there? As if they had a choice, or, as if people think that way. but it never made sense to me why they didn't leave. So I don't know, maybe DNA, I don't know. That's a good question.
I have a question. Are there any particular authors you've looked to while working on this project or other projects where even if you're not telling the same story, you're like, oh, I want to borrow this from this person, or oh, this is really amazing. This has like influenced me in some way.
I think everything that I read, every short story, every novel that I read influenced me. The only book that I would not read was Beloved, which I read since then, because everybody kept saying, oh, this is Beloved, because anytime you're writing a book about slavery, it's Beloved, right? So I was like, okay, well, mine is not going to be like Beloved. But I didn't know then that that's just what people say. Like, if you're a writer, oh, you're a writer, Oprah's going to get that. You're like, really? But they say that to everybody because that's the only thing people know to say. So I wouldn't read it. But then I've since read that. But I love stories. I read Little Bee, which I loved. Todd Goldberg's. Todd is my mentor, so I would read some of his short stories, just the emotion of things. Deanne Stillman, about the way she wrote settings, and she really personified settings, because I know one of the things that I struggled with was writing a setting that felt alive. Like, I didn't want it to feel like a map. Some people write, you read it, it's like, and then over the hills of this, I was like, I don't want to do that. I want it to be alive. So Toni Morrison, I loved Alice Walker, Women of Brewster's Place. I read a lot of that because I like the short stories because they just talked about women and briefly and throughout history. Hey, Red.
Natasha, you're such a good reader. I wondered, as you were writing the book, were you reading aloud?
No. It was when I got in the program that year, and as an emerging voice, you start reading your stuff and you start editing it. Like, even just now, I was like, I should have used a different word there. You're editing. When you read out loud, you could hear the things that you would change in the voice and the pattern. So I recommend it, but I wasn't reading it out loud, as I was writing it.
So how did you learn to read so well? Take drama classes?
No, I don't. It just makes sense to me. It just makes sense that I could hear the voice that I wrote it with. I could hear. So it's almost like I'm just a second behind her. Like I don't know if that makes sense. So even like with Dirty Laundry, when people come up to read, when they read with that voice that was in them, when they wrote it, it's a different read. No poet voice. There's something about that moment when you're into it, and people can connect to that. So I just try to read like that. Yeah, Hazel.
Dovetailing off the point you just made, do you think that there was interplay between your role in Dirty Laundry Lit and the act of writing and the act of creating for the novel? And how did those two sort of play off each other?
I think the best part of Dirty Laundry is the community and just that feeling of positivity when you leave, that you're not doing this for nothing. Like, there are people who love this. There are people here today, right? That, and we're the same. We're a community. And with Shades and Shadows, which is by creating that, it's just energy. So it wasn't, it's the love of words, that. So that's the interplay. It's an engine. It makes me say, you know what, get up and go write. If that person can get up there and tell this story and make it that awesome, I can get up and I can write another page. Or I can write one sentence today. Or, so it's just that synergy of people and community.
Actually, I want to ask you about that question of community and the idea of writer as a kind of literary citizen, not just the stereotype of the writer as someone who sits in their room all the time and doesn't interact with people, but in fact, which is about 78% true, but the other 22%, which is the part that makes us get dressed and take a shower and come out and do things. But I'm curious, about your sense of the writer's role, that the importance of literary citizenship and how it gets activated.
Yeah, you have to be, if you're a writer or you have friends that are artists, show up to their things, support them, because it's so lonely. Most writers are introverts anyway, and even if you say, you know what, once every 6 months I can put some clothes on and I can go out, I can make it, to this one thing. Okay, 30 minutes. I'll just promise myself 30 minutes, and then okay, an hour. I could do 10 more minutes,
right,
or something. But you have to do, because we depend on that. And for me, when I look at like this, Grace is in its second printing. It got all these great reviews and all this. I can't even believe it, because I'm looking at the books, and this just isn't about great. There are books that get made all the time that are great books that don't get attention. That's just what happened. And I just look at this book, I'm like, how is this different? I wanted to write a good book. I feel like it's a good book. It's a book I would want to read. But when you see it, like up there with like Girls that got $1 million advance, or the book by Yaya, I can't remember it, $2 million advance. These are books that were planned like months and months. And to see Grace up there with these same books, with Emma Klein and Walter Mosley, how does that even happen? It's the book, but it's also a community of people who are like, this is a good book. I've come out for this. I'm here supporting this. I bought this book. I want to talk about this book. That's how a community can compete against a $2 million book industry, because an organization, a corporation that puts $2 million behind a book is putting the people behind that investment, that $2 million investment. And to see this, and Counterpoint is amazing anyway. They have a great publicist. There's Dan. There's a lot of people in play. But it's also being a good person. Mm-hmm. Like, good as far as show up to people, support people. And it's hard, too, when you see other people doing really well, then you feel all the jealousies and insecurity that, you're like, But you still gotta get up and go, because we're all in the same boat.
Right.
We're all in the same, because it's going to be your turn next. And then you're going to need that person who just went to write a blurb for your book. And then that person that's behind you is going to need you to write that recommendation letter. And is going to need you to write so it's all connected, and it's just an engine of togetherness. And if you're in your room, you're not going to make those connections and meet those people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Other questions?
Hey, Meredith.
Hey, Natasha. Comment and a question. I have been feeling really numb since Orlando happened. When you were reading from your book, I felt it for the first time really fully. And thank you for that. And I just wonder if there's anything of that you feel too.
The numbness from...
Or the connection between the way your reading made me feel about something that happened 300 years later in a different setting.
I was thinking about that on the drive here, actually. For me, it's God. So I was asking God, I said, I feel like I have so many holes. Like how, all these blows, even growing up, with the police violence. My dad was a police officer, and my grandfather died, being beaten by police officers. He was a World War II veteran, 4th of July. He was beaten to death in front of his children. And my father became a police officer thinking he'd be exempt. And I remember moving to Santa Clarita in our car being surrounded by police officers pointing a gun at our car. And I'm waking up in the back of our station wagon and seeing that. And I just feel like I know when I think about the people, when they describe the people standing in that doorway when this guy comes out and there's people and they're just firing in that thing. I remember being 8 years old, in the back of the car, like, that could have been us, if my dad would have moved the wrong way. Like, he had a gun because he was a sheriff. So he had to say, I'm going to pull out my gun, and I'm watching through the thing. So all those moments, it's me all the time. So there's not a moment where I think that's not me. I just think, how can I grow above these holes, all these holes that are in me, and still have hope and love, and still tell a story that can make people say, look, this is happening still. This happened then, it's happening now. But we can still have hope and love and not be divided because the fallback position is that we just divide, we just separate, and we start labeling everyone. you know, and I don't want us to be there. So there's this tree I wrote about recently called Oak of the Golden Dream where I live. I had to write an essay about it. And it's where they first found gold in California. And it's all gutted, like, because people came thinking they were going to find gold. So it's like this big cave in the middle of the tree, and it grows still around this hole, and it's like reaching up. It's still green. It has acorns that fall. There's little oak trees all along there. But I think about that all the time. Like, we have to do that. We have to grow above our holes. Like, we have to extend and keep going because there's something better. We could still plant these little acorns that become something else and touch other people's lives. But, you know, even though we have these holes. So, yeah, it affects me a lot. Violence does, but there's beauty, you know, when we get through our grieving. And
in addition to that evening with your son in the hallway where it spurred your thoughts of the book, were there other moments where you had those overwhelming visions, or did it all come out of you from that one moment? And, you know, in addition to obviously your regular writing process, but were there other like overwhelming points?
Yeah, I had one more when there was a friend of ours who was Jewish, and she was a prostitute, and she lived down the street from us. And when she died, I knew what the rest of the book was about. And that happened like 2 years, 6 months later. And then I knew I just knew, and then I just had to piece it together. Yeah.
One more?
I was curious about being a writer versus being a woman of color writer.
Well, I always say, generally speaking, as a woman of color, but I think literature has a moral responsibility. I can't write for art's sake. So I love that people can say I do art for art's sake. I think as a woman of color and somebody who's socially active, I feel like I don't have the luxury to just write just, you know, that's beautiful that people can do that. And sometimes, you know, maybe I'll get to do that. But I feel like there's so much work to do. There's so much growth that has to happen around these holes. And if I get a stage or a platform, I want to be helping other people and not just helping myself. Yeah.
Should we ask for one more? Or see if we have one. If there's one more, right in the front.
Hey.
When and how did you know that you were a writer?
I used to write scary stories for my sister when she was little. I've always told stories, so I saw myself always as a storyteller, and then I would write them out like board games and things like that, and just slowly just wrote. And in high school I wrote a poem, but I never considered myself a poet. They read it for like the graduation, and I was like, yeah, that was just that thing. I was like, you know, but yeah, so it's just but I've always known. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget you can listen to this and all our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. And we hope to see you soon.